Hi everybody, welcome back. If you don't know, my name is Cooper, and today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to style your houseplants like an interior designer. So I just wanted to start off this video by giving a little bit of a disclaimer. When it comes to plant knowledge, I am pretty limited. I have a lot of houseplants and I try my best to keep them alive, but by no means am I perfect. Regardless, I'm just going to share ways that I really love to style my plants in my home and some tips on how to make them feel integrated and natural. So the first thing that I would recommend when you're buying houseplants is to make sure that they make sense for your space. And I know this may seem obvious, but it is really important. Too often have I found myself going out to a plant shop, finding a really great plant, and then dies on me, and I'm like, oh, why did it die? And then I realize, this plant was totally wrong for my space, totally wrong for the climate that I live in, and all that. So it's very important to go into the plant purchasing process with an idea of the conditions of wherever you live, whether it's your house or apartment, and make sure to take that into account, because you don't want to spend a bunch of money on a plant and a plant pot just for the plant to die in like 2 weeks. Like, nobody wants that. So the bottom line is, if you're going to buy a plant, make sure you talk to the people at the plant shop that you're buying from or whatever, and make sure that it fits the conditions of your space and that it will be able to thrive. I live in Oregon, and so it is extremely dry here, especially in the winter, which is pretty bad for tropical houseplants. So something that I've had to do is invest in a humidifier for my apartment so my plants are able to thrive a little bit more. And I did this a couple weeks ago, and actually I've noticed a pretty big change in plant growth. So the first styling tip that I do have breaks plants down into two categories. So the first category would be a statement plant, and then the second category would be a supporting plant. So this is a very interior designy thing to do, but a statement plant is going to be a plant. It doesn't necessarily have to be large, but it needs to be eye-catching. So it needs to gauge your visual interest upon entering the space. So for example, in my living room, I have a Dracaena marginata. I've placed it in a spot where you can see it upon entering my apartment, and your eyes are immediately drawn to it and kind of bring you forward through the apartment into the living room. And then the second category of plants that I was talking about is supporting plants, and basically this would be smaller plants that are in your space. Supporting plants I like to do in smaller surfaces. If you've watched my channel before, you would know that I've mentioned my 2 plants per surface rule. So basically no more than 2 plants on any kind of surface, whether it's a desk or a table or whatever. With these supporting plants, I like to experiment, get a plant that you haven't heard of or you find really interesting, and do it on a small scale so you know how to take care of it. And if you have any issues with it, you can either find a new home for it or whatever. Supporting plants are really important in spaces. They do provide something that I think is very essential in any home, which is a sign of life. If you take a look at a space that has absolutely no plants, it kind of feels more like museum-y and it doesn't feel lived in. When you put in these supporting plants, you put signs of life into little corners of your home, which I think can really add a lot to the space. So the next tip I would recommend is playing with scale. This is probably one of the main things that interior designers do with plants and spaces, because it can really add a lot. For example, if you have a corner of your home that has, no artwork up, blank walls, you don't know what to do with it, you can find a really cute little stool or something and then put a plant on top of it that is very sculptural. So what I mean by this is either like a very tall and squiggly plant, or just something that draws the eye, and it can serve as artwork in your home as well. A lot of this is finding plants that speak to you, and so whatever you're drawn towards, if it works in your space, then I'm all for that. So moving on, I know you guys are all expecting me to say this, and I'm gonna say it because it's important. So the pot choice. And I know this can be a little bit tricky because I think we get very wrapped up in trying to be overly fancy when it comes to pots. I have plenty of fancy pots and plenty of normal pots, and you can make either look absolutely amazing. If you have a lower budget, you can go to Home Depot or pretty much any store that has a garden area or a plant shop and find terracotta pots. In my opinion, terracotta pots are extremely timeless. They wear so well with time. Honestly, they just look really beautiful. And you can have all terracotta pots in your home if you would like. Something that's very important when it comes to plant pots is making sure they follow some kind of theme or general style. I'm not saying you need to have all terracotta pots in your apartment or house, but I'm saying, keep them within the same variety. In my apartment, for example, I keep my plant pots in the variety of stoneware specifically. So I have a lot of porcelain, terracotta, and ceramic pots, and they make for a more cohesive look when they're mixed together. Another thing that you can do if you're trying to find some unique pots is go thrifting. Honestly, thrift shops have the absolute best plant pots. I've found so many great ones. Obviously, they're not going to be like these designer looking fancy stoneware pots, but honestly have some hidden gems. So look around, go often, and scan to see if you can find something, because I can guarantee you there's probably something hiding on the back shelf. Something that I also really love to do with plant pots is lay into scale and proportion. And what I mean by this is maybe pairing a really tall plant with a really small pot. I think this can create a really unique look. Obviously, you need to make sure that the plant can live in that pot and grow safely, because you don't want to stuff a huge plant into a tiny pot. It's just going to die because it's going to have no room to grow, and how is it supposed to thrive? So you want to make sure that the root system, can obviously fit in a smaller pot, but I would say that's a really great way to kind of elevate your plants. And a lot of people I know have, trailing plants. So this would be like pothos, things along the lines of that. So something that I really love to do with trailing plants is pair them with taller plant pots. I think this can really help elevate the plant and make it feel a little bit more unique if it's a more basic house plant that we're all used to seeing. So my next tip is going to be opting for a real piece of furniture instead of a plant stand. So I'm sure you guys all know the kind of plant pots that have a stand on the bottom that holds it up. We've all seen these at Target or, whatever. And I personally hate these. I don't like them at all. I think they kind of ruin the plant and they just don't look good. That's my opinion. So whatever, get over it. So something that I really have been loving is getting a furniture piece instead and then just putting the plant on top of it. So this would be a really cool vintage stool, a really old unique chair, things along the lines of that. I think this can create a really cool effect. And I also think those, plant stands, they look a little bit awkward in spaces. Something that goes hand in hand with these plant stand planters is cheap materials. As I mentioned before, sticking to stoneware is usually the best option I found, but things you really want to avoid are going to be plastic planters, or for example, they have these like painted pastel planters that they sell on Amazon. As I said, go to thrift stores, look around. You can find plant pots there for like $3 and they'll be stoneware. I think it's better to go thrifting and thrift a plant pot than buy a $20 cheap pastel, whatever. The next thing I want to talk about is something I've been absolutely loving lately. I found out about this a couple years ago, and ever since, it's all I've done with my plants, and that is putting a top dressing on it. So if anybody doesn't know, a top dressing is a decorative material for the top of your dirt on your plant. So this can either be small stones, rocks, sand. You can get really creative with it and even do like little landscapes, but these are a really great way to make your plants feel a little bit more seamless. And prior to this, I didn't really see a point in doing this because I didn't really feel like the dirt looked bad, and I still don't think it does. Adding a top dressing to your plants really helps make it look more like an art piece. I think it really allows the plant to shine a little bit more and pop in the space. So for my plants around my apartment, something that I'll do is, this is actually a really good tip. So listen, I go to the aquarium store. I know that sounds crazy. And I buy a bag of like fish tank rocks. And then I take that and I use it as a top dressing on my plants. And it's great. And it's actually a lot cheaper than buying a actual top dressing at a plant store. You can also go to the hardware store and get like a gravel material. That also works. This is also a really good option if you have a plant that's a little bit top heavy. It can kind of help keep the root system a little bit more intact. And we don't want our plants tipping over and spilling dirt all over the place. That leads me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is getting experimental with the ways that you display your plants. Something that I really love is wall-mounted plants. As you can see behind me, I have a wall-mounted fern mounted on top of this really cool piece of tree bark, and then it's also inside of a kokedama, which is a plant moss ball wrapped in twine. I personally really love these. I think they're so cool. You can also hang kokedama from the ceiling. I think that's a little bit more of a designed way to incorporate hanging plants. I personally am not a fan of hanging plants. I don't like them. They look very 2013 to me, and I don't know, they just feel very boho. The last thing I wanted to talk about is making sure that you create a balanced look with your plants. You want to make sure your plants look cohesive in your space. And you can do this with your plant pots like I was talking about, or something that's even more important is making sure that you're not pairing the wrong types of plants together. And I know that sounds a little bit weird. So just in general, it's kind of like a no-no to pair a bunch of tropical plants with like a desert plant. Like it doesn't look right. And so I would say by room, do this. If you really love desert plants and you already have a bunch of tropical plants in your living room, maybe put the desert plants in your bedroom or your bathroom or whatever. But putting them next to each other, especially in a group, will make it look really dysfunctional and awkward. And I think a lot of people wonder why you'll see a bunch of plants grouped together on Pinterest or Instagram and it looks super aesthetic and cool. And then they try and do that in their own home and it looks off. So you want to make sure there's like something similar between the two. So if you're going to group plants together, I would do, either similar pots, similar plant structures, things along the lines of that to make sure that it creates a cohesive look. You also want to make sure that you're pairing these with decor in a more equal manner. So what I mean by that is you don't really want to have just a plant out on the surface of something that's pretty big. So let's take my coffee table, for example. I have a really cool plant. It's a Fakia edulis, and it's not just stand alone on my coffee table. It's paired with books and candles and, other pieces of decor, so it feels a little bit more natural. So I would make sure that when you're styling plants, especially in places like that, nightstands or coffee tables or side tables or desks, and make sure that you pair it with some other kind of decor so it looks more cohesive and natural. And anyways, I think that's all I have for you guys today. As always, you can find me on Instagram at Cooper Osinski Interiors, and you can visit my website, cooperosinski.com, where you can send me an email and book a consultation with me. And if you have any questions about plant styling or want to get my opinion on anything, feel free to send me a DM or drop something in the comments, and I'm happy to help you guys. And I hope you guys are having a great Sunday or whatever day you're watching this. And yeah, bye.